Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this incredibly fascinating shift in how we understand our digital world today. If you've ever felt like the way we consume information has, completely fractured over the last decade or two, well, you definitely aren't alone. Today, we're exploring postmodern media theory. We're specifically going to focus on how it views the concepts of fragmentation and decentralized power. To really get our heads around this, I want you to think about your daily habits for a second. When was the absolute last time you, your friends, and your neighbors all sat down and consumed the exact same news broadcast or TV channel at the exact same time? Kind of hard to remember, right? For most of us, that shared, synchronized viewing experience is a total relic of the past. The whole idea of a single mass audience, yeah, that might actually be entirely obsolete now. And this shift in paradigms is literally massive. Traditional models, think of your top-down Marxist theories, historically assumed a pretty unified audience, just passively receiving fixed truths from centralized powers, like a giant megaphone shouting at a crowd. But the postmodern landscape argues those old lenses are just completely broken. We've entered this new cultural era defined by scattered microcommunities and entirely fluid realities. To decode the media habits on your smartphone right now, we're going to explore these 5 key concepts from postmodern media theory. First, the end of mass media. Second, the fragmented audience. Third, the rise of the prosumer. Fourth, hyperreality and simulated truths. And finally, number 5, some criticisms. Is power actually hidden? Okay, let's start with number 1, the end of mass media. Basically, the failure of old structural theories. In the past, structural theories assumed society was just this monolithic block. The assumption was that audiences were unified, literally glued to shared TV channels and daily news bulletins. Because people were grouped into very predictable social categories, theorists argued that a tiny centralized group of media owners could easily exert ideological control. They could shape a single dominant worldview because, well, everyone was looking at the exact same screen. But postmodernists argue that this unified system simply doesn't exist anymore. Moving right along to section 2, the fragmented audience, or as I like to think of it, retreating into the personalized feed. This brings us to what postmodernists call cultural pluralism. Instead of one massive audience tuning into the evening news together, we're totally scattered. We access our media through highly personalized feeds, niche streaming services, gaming platforms, and interactive digital spaces. We don't organize around those traditional social categories as much anymore. Instead, we form thousands of microcommunities based entirely on shared online cultures. Whether that's a super niche Discord server for retro gaming or a highly specific bizarre side of TikTok, that's where we live now. So the crucial point here is this number, 0. Postmodernists argue there are exactly 0 dominant ideologies today. Why? Because a dispersed, fragmented audience simply cannot be controlled uniformly. There's no way. You aren't passively receiving information anymore. You're actively curating your own media environment. You choose exactly who to follow and what to watch. And if the audience is completely dispersed like that, traditional concerns about some elite ideological control, they become entirely irrelevant. Which brings us to number 3, rise of the prosumer. This is all about decentralized power right in the palm of your hand. In the digital age, the power dynamics completely flip. Postmodernists argue that power isn't held by a small elite of owners anymore. Instead, we see the rise of the prosumer. So a prosumer is someone who consumes media, but simultaneously produces it. The boundary between the creator and the audience is just completely blurred. I mean, think about it. If you've ever posted a video on TikTok, uploaded YouTube, or even just shared an Instagram reel, you are actively decentralizing media power as a prosumer. And this is exactly how that power shift happens, step by step. First, users completely reject being passive sponges for media. They just don't want it. Second, millions of individuals take the tools into their own hands to create and remix content. And third, thanks to digital platforms, ordinary people can suddenly achieve massive global distribution. This sequence fundamentally challenges the dominance of traditional media institutions because the power to shape narratives is now decentralized across millions of active, everyday users. Let's jump to section 4, hyperreality and simulated truths. This deals with Baudrillard's shifting meanings. The theorist Jean Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality is absolutely central to postmodern media theory. Baudrillard argues that media doesn't just hold up a mirror to the real world anymore, it actually replaces it with simulations. It's kind of mind-bending, right? We're constantly flooded with images, narratives, and signs that actually begin to feel far more real than the physical, tangible world right outside our windows.
So in a hyperreal environment, power isn't about some rich executive imposing an ideology on you. It's all about the endless circulation of signs and images. Because meaning itself is constantly shifting and changing, power becomes super diffuse. You're using all this custom media to construct your own fluid identity. And because you have ultimate choice and interactivity, no single institution or elite can impose a fixed truth from above. Essentially, you're building your own reality.
Now, let's look at Section 5, Criticisms. Is power hidden? It's time for a little pushback against postmodern theory.
Of course, other major schools of thought have some pretty strong counter-arguments here. First, the Marxists step in and say, hold on, this idea of fragmentation is completely overstated. Sure, there are tons of creators, but a tiny number of massive corporations still monopolize the actual ownership of the platforms we use. Then, pluralists, who generally believe power is distributed among competing groups, point out that yes, while we have increased choice, overarching market forces still ultimately dictate what content gets made and becomes available to us. And perhaps most relevant today, cultural sociologists warn us that algorithms act as a form of invisible, centralized power. You might think you're choosing your customized feed, but actually, the algorithm is dictating what you see. So where does that leave us? Well, despite those very heavy and very valid criticisms, postmodernism remains incredibly influential, especially when looking at structural theory counterarguments. Why? Because it perfectly maps onto the reality of our daily digital lives. It accurately captures our active participation online. It perfectly explains how and why we curate these personalized media environments. And most importantly, it highlights the undeniable erosion of traditional media authority in favor of something much, much more fluid. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider. As you navigate this highly fragmented, decentralized media landscape, really ask yourself, are you truly customizing your reality as the postmodernists suggest? Or, as the sociologists warn, is the algorithm secretly customizing you? Keep that in mind the next time you lose yourself scrolling through your own shattered mirror of a personalized feed.